Rebecca's water broke at 4:51 p.m. in the hospital cafeteria. 6 weeks early, but when the staff rushed to help her, Dr. Adrian Vale walked past without stopping, his arm wrapped around Celine Marrow, the mistress he'd been parading through the hallways for weeks, completely unaware the pregnant wife he'd divorced that morning was a secret billionaire who had purchased his family hospital. There are some betrayals so cruel, so public, so humiliating, that they don't just break your heart, they change your entire life. Rebecca Holloway never imagined the worst day of her life would also become the first day of her freedom. By sunset, she would be a divorced woman, a premature mother, a patient in the very hospital where her husband had spent months humiliating her. And by the following week, she would become the woman who owned every hallway he swaggered through. But to understand how Rebecca got there, you have to understand the kind of marriage she survived. Because Adrian Vale did not become cruel overnight. He became cruel slowly, professionally, elegantly. The kind of cruel that leaves no bruises people can easily point to, but leaves a woman doubting her own voice, her own worth, even her own memory. And by the time Rebecca realized the man she married no longer saw her as a wife, she was already carrying his child and hiding a secret that would bring his empire to its knees. So let's go back before the cafeteria floor, before the divorce papers, before the takeover, back to the beginning of the end. Part 1. The marriage everyone envied. From the outside, Rebecca and Adrian looked perfect. He was brilliant, polished, and born into one of the most respected medical families in the city. The Vales had founded Vale Grace Medical Center nearly 60 years earlier, starting from a small surgical practice and turning it into a flagship private hospital known for its cardiac unit, luxury donor wing, and impossible waiting list. She was graceful, educated, and understated. Rebecca had a way of making everyone around her feel calmer. She listened when people spoke. She remembered details. She noticed the intern trembling before a presentation, the receptionist hiding tears after a bad phone call, the cleaner everyone ignored at 6 a.m. People called her kind. What they didn't realize was that kindness had become her survival language. When Rebecca first met Adrian, he was magnetic. He noticed everything about her. The tea she preferred, the authors she loved, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. In the beginning, he made her feel chosen. That was the word he used, chosen. And Rebecca, who had spent most of her life being practical rather than romantic, let herself believe that she had been chosen by a good man. For the first year, he was attentive, protective, ambitious, yes, but never openly cruel. The shift began after the wedding, subtle at first. He corrected the way she spoke at dinners. He laughed when she offered an opinion on hospital fundraising strategy. He began referring to her as too emotional anytime she challenged him. Then came the money. Though Adrian came from wealth, he was obsessed with control, especially financial control. He insisted it was cleaner if he handled everything. Their accounts, their household budget, her spending, her schedule. "Rebecca," he'd say with a thin smile, "you don't need the stress of numbers. Let me manage things that actually matter." What he meant was, let me decide what you're allowed to have. She noticed it first in small humiliations. A card that declined at a bookstore. A message from the bank asking her to verify a purchase she never should have needed permission to make. A quiet conversation after a dinner party in which Adrian told her, without raising his voice, that buying her sister a birthday necklace had been reckless and embarrassingly middle class. By the 3rd year of marriage, Adrian no longer hid his contempt in private. He didn't hit her. He did something colder. He dismantled her piece by piece. He criticized her clothes, mocked her softness, told her she was lucky anyone had married her, said pregnancy had made her visibly ordinary. And when Rebecca cried, Adrian would sigh as if she were exhausting him. "You always make yourself the victim." That sentence became the lock on her cage, because once a woman starts wondering whether her pain is somehow her fault, she becomes easier to manage. But everything changed the day Rebecca learned she was pregnant. For one fragile moment, she thought the baby might soften him. Instead, it revealed who he really was. At first, Adrian reacted to the pregnancy with perfect public enthusiasm. He held her waist at charity galas, spoke about our growing family to donors, announced that fatherhood had given him new perspective. People congratulated them like they were watching a fairy tale unfold. Only Rebecca knew that in private he treated the pregnancy as an inconvenience to his image. He complained she was tired too often, told her not to waddle in public, asked her obstetrician whether bloating could be managed better. He never once asked if she was scared, never once touched her stomach when the baby kicked unless someone else was watching. And then, around the 5th month, Celine Marrow appeared. She didn't arrive quietly. Women like Celine never do. She entered Vale Grace Medical Center as a branding consultant tied to a donor expansion project, though nobody could fully explain who hired her. She was stunning in the deliberate way that announces itself from across a room: sleek dark hair, flawless tailoring, a laugh that landed half a second too loudly. And within a week, everyone in the administrative wing knew exactly what she was. Not officially, but obviously. She started showing up at Adrian's side during lunches, then in the executive elevator, then at hospital events Rebecca had been told Adrian was too busy to attend with her. At first, she did what wounded wives are trained to do. She explained it away. Maybe it was business. Maybe she was imagining it. Maybe she was hormonal. Maybe Adrian was right and she was becoming too sensitive. But denial shattered one Thursday evening in the surgeon's lounge corridor. Rebecca had come to bring Adrian the scarf he forgot at home, a small thing, a thoughtful thing, the kind of thing wives do when they still believe tenderness matters. She heard Celine before she saw her. That laugh, then Adrian's voice, low and amused. When Rebecca rounded the corner, his hand was on Celine's lower back, not accidentally. Not politely, possessively. And the expression on his face when he saw Rebecca wasn't guilt.
It was irritation, as if she had interrupted him. Celine glanced at Rebecca's pregnant stomach, then smiled the way a woman smiles when she knows she has already been chosen over you. "Oops," she said lightly. "Am I in someone's seat?" Rebecca remembered every detail of that moment. The cold smell of antiseptic, the fluorescent buzz overhead, the scarf in her hand, the way her fingers tightened around the wool until her knuckles ached. Adrian didn't deny anything. He just looked at her and said, "Don't do this here." Not, "It's not what it looks like." Not, "Rebecca, wait." Not even a lie. Just contempt. That night he came home after midnight and informed her that she needed to stop embarrassing him with jealous scenes. And then, while she stood there 6 months pregnant, trying not to cry, he said the sentence that broke whatever remained of her illusions. "You should be grateful I still keep this marriage respectable." Respectable. That was the word he used for betrayal hidden behind expensive walls. From that moment on, Adrian stopped pretending to be careful. Celine was everywhere, in hallways, at hospital fundraisers, at donor dinners, in whispers, in glances, in the silence that followed whenever Rebecca entered a room. The humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was curated. And perhaps the worst part of all was that Evelyn Vale, Adrian's mother, protector of the family name, did absolutely nothing to stop it. because in Evelyn's eyes, Rebecca was always temporary, useful at first, elegant enough for photographs, but not born with the sharp edges required to survive the veils. One afternoon, Rebecca found Evelyn in the board lounge reviewing gala plans. Gathering every ounce of courage she had, Rebecca asked quietly, "Doesn't any of this matter to you? Your son is humiliating me in your hospital." Evelyn didn't even look up immediately. When she finally did, her expression was smooth and almost bored. "My dear, men like Adrian go through phases. Wise women learn not to turn private unpleasantness into public instability." Rebecca stared at her. Private unpleasantness? That was what they called a pregnant wife being publicly replaced? In that moment, something inside Rebecca went still. Not broken, still. And stillness in the right woman is often the beginning of a plan. The lottery ticket was bought on a Tuesday. The day before, Adrian had told Rebecca her pregnancy had made her less presentable and suggested she skip an upcoming foundation dinner because donors preferred energy in a room, not fragility. So the next morning, rather than sit in the house and cry, Rebecca drove. No destination, no plan, just movement. The city blurred by in glass and traffic and gray winter light until she found herself pulling into a gas station 40 miles from home because the baby was kicking hard and she needed ginger ale. Inside, while waiting at the counter, she noticed a bright display for a record jackpot. Something about it felt absurd, almost funny.
Her whole life felt like it belonged to someone else already. So, on impulse, the first impulsive thing she had done in years, she added a lottery ticket to the counter. The cashier smiled and said, "Maybe this one changes everything." Rebecca almost laughed. It did. She didn't check the numbers for 3 days. The ticket sat in her coat pocket until Friday night when Adrian canceled dinner with her for the 3rd time that week, claiming an emergency surgery. An hour later, a nurse accidentally sent Rebecca a photo from the hospital gala setup, asking whether the floral arrangements should go near Dr. Vale and Miss Marrow's table. Dr. Vale and Miss Marrow. Not husband and wife, not family, them. Rebecca sat in the dark living room, shaking, and pulled the crumpled ticket from her pocket just to give herself something meaningless to do. Then she checked the numbers. Once, twice, 3 times. Her heart began to pound so violently she thought something was wrong with the baby. Every number matched, every single one. The jackpot, after taxes and claim structuring, would leave her with more money than Adrian could have imagined. Not just comfort, not just escape. Power. Real power. For the first time in years, Rebecca did not cry because she was hurt. She cried because she was free. But she told no one. Not Adrian, not the Vales, not even her sister at first. She called one person, Nolan Pierce, a lawyer whose name she had saved months earlier after quietly researching how abused spouses leave powerful men without being destroyed in court. Nolan answered at 11:14 p.m. Rebecca's voice shook when she said, "If I needed to disappear financially before my husband knew I had money, how would I do it?" There was a silence. Then Nolan said, very calmly, "Start by not saying another word over the phone. I'm sending a car." Within 48 hours, Rebecca had an attorney, a financial shield, a private claims team, and the kind of legal firewall only the extremely wealthy can build. The winnings were claimed anonymously through a trust. Marcus Shaw entered the picture then, discreet, exact, impossible to rattle. While Rebecca focused on surviving the last stretch of pregnancy, Marcus studied the veils, and what he found was fascinating. Vale Grace Medical Center was prestigious, yes, but beneath the glossy reputation, it was vulnerable. The hospital had recently financed a costly expansion. Debt had been stacked against projected donor growth that never fully materialized. Several private stakeholders were restless. A key group of silent investors had been looking for an exit. Evelyn Vale believed the family name alone could hold the place together. Marcus knew better. The hospital wasn't untouchable. It was purchasable. And when he presented the structure to Rebecca, control through debt acquisition, followed by majority purchase through holding entities, she sat very still. The old Rebecca would have recoiled from the audacity of it. The new Rebecca asked only one question. If we do this, can it be done before Adrian realizes I'm leaving? Marcus gave the faintest smile. Yes. So, while Adrian was busy flaunting Celine through hospital corridors, while Evelyn prepared legacy speeches, while the board assumed the Vale name was eternal, Rebecca Holloway, the wife they considered powerless, quietly positioned herself to become their owner. Adrian served Rebecca with divorce papers over breakfast. No warning, no conversation, no decency. Just a leather folder placed beside her tea, as if it were a brunch menu. The morning light through the kitchen windows was pale and cold. Rebecca had barely slept. The baby had been restless all night, pressing hard beneath her ribs, and her lower back ached in deep waves. Adrian stood across from her in a charcoal suit, knotting his tie while she opened the folder. "Sign today," he said. "My attorney has arranged everything." Rebecca read in silence. The terms were brutal but carefully constructed. A generous-looking settlement designed to appear fair to outsiders while ensuring she walked away with no claim to anything meaningful connected to the hospital or family assets. Temporary housing, controlled support, a confidentiality clause, a silencing package. She looked up slowly. "I'm 8 months pregnant." Adrian adjusted his cufflink. "And dragging this out would only make things uglier." Uglier. As though he had not already dragged ugliness through every room of their marriage. Rebecca swallowed. "You're divorcing me for her?" He didn't answer immediately. That would have required honesty. Adrian preferred superiority. "What I'm doing is removing chaos from my life before my child is born." My child, not our child. Rebecca felt something cold move through her chest. Then Adrian crossed the kitchen, leaned one hand against the table, and lowered his voice. "If you have any dignity left, you'll sign quietly. Don't force me to be unkind." That was Adrian's favorite trick, threatening cruelty as if mercy were his natural state. He left for court 40 minutes later. By late noon, the filing had been pushed through with humiliating efficiency, using terms Rebecca's team had fully anticipated. Nolan had advised her to sign, not because Adrian deserved compliance, but because the timing mattered. Let him think he had won. Let him feel safe. Let him walk into his next week believing Rebecca had been discarded, defeated, and rendered harmless. So she signed. And when Adrian returned briefly that afternoon to collect a watch and some documents, he paused at the doorway and gave her a once-over that lingered on her swollen stomach. "You'll be taken care of," he said. There are sentences that sound generous until you hear the contempt underneath them. Rebecca, standing there in soft house clothes with one hand pressed to the small of her back, simply nodded. Adrian mistook that nod for surrender. It was the last mistake he would ever make as owner-in-waiting of Vale Grace Medical Center. By late afternoon, Rebecca had gone to the hospital because her doctor wanted monitoring after a stressful day and elevated blood pressure. She hated the idea of being there, hated the smell, hated the stairs, hated the corridors that had witnessed her humiliation, but she went for the baby. The hospital cafeteria was half full when it happened. An orderly was laughing near the coffee station. 2 nurses were arguing gently over shifts. A television in the corner was showing muted financial news no one was watching.
Premature labor is a frightening kind of chaos. Bright lights, urgent shoes, medical language moving too fast, consent forms, monitors, hands. Rebecca drifted between pain and fear and adrenaline while the team worked around her. Tessa never left. Not during intake, not when contractions intensified, not when Rebecca's blood pressure spiked again, not when she finally asked, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Did he ask about me?" Tessa's silence told the truth before her words did. "No," she said gently. Something in Rebecca's face changed then. Not pain, acceptance. Hours later, after a labor more difficult than anyone wanted and faster than anyone expected, Rebecca gave birth to a baby girl. Tiny, red-faced, angry at the world in the healthy way premature babies sometimes are. The first cry sliced through the room like light. Rebecca burst into tears the second she heard it. "Is she okay?" she kept asking. "Is she okay? Please tell me she's okay." "She's strong," Tessa said, smiling through her own wet eyes, "and loud. I like her already." The baby needed observation in the NICU, but she was breathing. Breathing. Sometimes that word is enough to make a mother feel the universe soften by 1 inch. When they placed the baby briefly against Rebecca's chest, Rebecca stared at her daughter like she was looking at a reason to live that had finally taken human form. "Ivy," she whispered. Tessa leaned in. "That's her name?" Rebecca nodded. "Ivy. Because ivy grows where it's not invited, because it survives against stone, because it climbs." In the quiet hours after delivery, while the hospital dimmed and machines hummed and mothers slept in nearby rooms, Rebecca lay awake under thin blankets with her body aching and her mind startlingly clear. Nolan called just after midnight. Marcus had finalized the last signatures. The debt purchase was complete. The control block had transferred. The board would be formally notified before market open. Rebecca listened without interrupting. When Nolan finished, he asked softly, "Are you sure you want the announcement this week? We can delay." Rebecca turned her head toward the NICU window at the end of the corridor, where her daughter was sleeping beneath warm lights in a transparent crib no larger than a prayer. "No," she said, "no delays." A pause. Then, with more calm than she had felt in years, Rebecca added, "Let them meet me exactly as I am." By Monday, rumors were already slithering through Vale Grace Medical Center, something about a major ownership shift, something about private equity, something about an emergency board meeting, something about investors pulling out, something about the Vale family losing control. Adrian dismissed all of it. He arrived in a dark tailored suit, coffee in hand, ego fully intact. Adrian's power had depended on silence. Rebecca had purchased a room where silence no longer protected him. Then came the second blow. Rebecca turned to Evelyn. "As of today, the board will also vote on restructuring executive oversight. Legacy family privileges are suspended pending governance review." Evelyn's mouth tightened. "You vindictive little fool. Do you have any idea what it takes to run a hospital?" Rebecca's answer was immediate. Yes, more than it takes to inherit one. Marcus almost smiled. A board member cleared his throat, another adjusted his papers. No one came to the Veil's rescue, because power is loyal only while it is convinced it remains power, and that morning everyone in the room knew the current had shifted. Celine, who had been waiting outside under the impression she was about to join Adrian for a donor lunch, watched through the glass as an executive assistant approached her minutes later. "Ms. Marrow," the woman said stiffly, "your consulting access has been revoked. Security will escort you to collect your belongings." Celine laughed at first. Then she realized nobody else was laughing. Humiliation looks different on a man who has spent his whole life protected from it. Adrian raged. He threatened lawsuits, called Rebecca unstable, insisted the postpartum stress had made her vindictive, claimed she was being manipulated by opportunists, demanded private meetings, demanded father's rights, demanded explanations he had not earned. Rebecca gave him none in person. Everything went through legal channels. That destroyed him more than any dramatic confrontation could have, because Adrian understood anger, he understood tears, he understood pleading. What he did not understand was calm. Calm is terrifying when it comes from the woman you thought you had broken. In the days that followed, more emerged. Staff who had been quiet for years began speaking. A procurement officer disclosed donor entertainment charges routed through research funds. A nurse revealed she had been pressured to alter scheduling records to accommodate Adrian's private meetings with Celine. Residents admitted his retaliation had affected recommendations and rotations. Evelyn tried to salvage influence, but Rebecca had moved too cleanly, too legally, too completely. Every path the Veils might have used to regain control had been sealed before they even knew a war existed. Meanwhile, Rebecca spent her mornings in the NICU. No makeup, no boardroom armor, just a mother in a chair beside her daughter, resting one finger against Ivy's impossibly small hand. Tessa would often find her there before dawn. One morning, Tessa brought coffee and asked, "How are you holding up, really?" Rebecca stared through the glass for a long moment. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "I think I was in survival mode for so long that I don't know what safety feels like." Tessa nodded. "That's normal." Rebecca gave a tired half-smile. "Does it ever stop feeling strange, being treated kindly?" Tessa's eyes softened. "It stops feeling suspicious first. Then one day, it starts feeling like home."
Those words stayed with Rebecca, because takeover was never really the point. Escape was. Dignity was. Protection was. Building something better for Ivy was. Still, justice has its own healing power, and justice arrived in stages. Celine attempted one final visit, sweeping into the hospital lobby in oversized sunglasses and brittle confidence, insisting she had an appointment with Adrian. Security informed her Adrian no longer had access to restricted floors. When she demanded to speak to management, the receptionist, who had once watched Celine smirk at Rebecca in the same lobby, politely replied, "You'd need authorization from Ms. Holloway." Ms. Holloway. For a second, Celine simply stood there, absorbing the new shape of the world. Then she turned and left. As for Adrian, the man who had once walked past his laboring wife without stopping, he finally requested permission to visit Rebecca in a mediated setting. She agreed only once. Not because she deserved it, because she wanted to hear what his remorse sounded like when stripped of an audience. He entered the room looking thinner, tired, still expensive, but diminished. For the first minute, he said nothing. Then, "You set me up." Rebecca almost laughed. "No, Adrian," she said. "I saw you clearly." His jaw tightened. "You hid money from me. You hid a mistress in my face while I carried your child." "That's not the same thing." "It's not," Rebecca said. "What I did was self-defense." He stared at her as if the concept had never occurred to him. Then he tried a different angle. "You're enjoying this." Rebecca considered that. "No," she said at last. "I'm relieved by it." That answer wounded him more than hatred could have, because hate would have meant he still mattered emotionally. Relief meant she was already on the other side of him. Before he left, Adrian asked the only honest question he had asked in years. "When did you stop loving me?" Rebecca looked toward the window, toward a city turning gold under late afternoon light. "I think," she said quietly, "I stopped the day you made me feel lonely in my own marriage. Everything after that was just me learning the truth." He had no reply, and for once he walked away alone. Most revenge stories end at the moment of victory, but real power is revealed in what a person builds after they finally get it. Rebecca did not take over Vale Grace Medical Center just to punish Adrian. She took it over so no one under its roof would ever again be forced to suffer quietly because the wrong family controlled the silence. Within 3 months, the changes began. A maternal advocacy department was created with emergency support for high-risk pregnancies, domestic abuse screening, mental health intervention, and legal referral services for vulnerable patients. The donor luxury lounge budget was cut, and ICU staffing increased. Resident retaliation complaints were moved under independent oversight. Executive expense transparency became mandatory. Fraternization and favoritism policies were rewritten and enforced. Several longtime employees cried when the new childcare program for hospital staff was announced. Rebecca didn't cry publicly.
But that night, holding Ivy against her chest in the rocking chair of the apartment she had chosen for herself, not too grand, not too flashy, just peaceful, she let herself feel the weight of what had changed. The hospital no longer smelled like humiliation. It smelled of antiseptic and coffee and possibility. When reporters began circling the story, Rebecca refused every sensational interview. She didn't want to become a spectacle. She did, however, release one statement. No institution should rely on inherited power at the expense of integrity. We are rebuilding this hospital around care, accountability, and dignity for patients, families, and staff. That statement made headlines. But among the staff, another sentence traveled more quietly, spoken from department to department, floor to floor. She came back for all of us. Not because Rebecca was perfect, not because she was fearless, but because she had been overlooked long enough to understand the cost of being unprotected. Evelyn Vale resigned 6 weeks later. Adrian's privileges were suspended indefinitely pending review and eventually revoked after multiple findings of misconduct. He tried to rebuild elsewhere, but reputations do not travel well when their polish depended on power. He had spent years believing the hospital was his birthright. In the end, it became the place that witnessed his irrelevance. And perhaps the cruelest irony of all, the daughter he ignored the day she was born grew up hearing her mother's name spoken through those halls with respect. Not fear, not pity, respect. One year later, on a bright spring morning, the hospital held a dedication ceremony for the new Women's and Neonatal Wing. Rebecca didn't want a grand event, but Tessa insisted the staff needed this. People need to see what survival looks like when it wins, she told her. So Rebecca stood at the podium in a simple blue dress, with Ivy on her hip for the opening photographs, before handing her gently to Tessa. The plaque behind the curtain read, "The Ivy Holloway Center for Maternal and Newborn Care." Doctors, nurses, residents, donors, and administrators gathered beneath clear white canopies in the courtyard. Sunlight flashed across hospital windows. Somewhere in the back, a baby cried, and everyone laughed softly. Rebecca stepped to the microphone. A year earlier, even speaking in front of such a crowd would have made her hands shake, but pain has a way of burning self-consciousness out of a person. She looked at the building, at the doors she had once entered feeling small, at the same walls that had heard her humiliation, at the place that had nearly become the symbol of everything stolen from her. And then she looked at the people who chose truth when it finally became safe to tell it. 12 months ago, she began, I came into this hospital as a patient in one of the most vulnerable moments of my life. I was frightened, heartbroken, and not entirely sure my voice mattered anymore. The courtyard went still. But some people here treated me with compassion when compassion would have been easier to avoid. Some people told the truth when silence would have been safer. And because of that, this hospital has become something better than a legacy. It has become a responsibility. She paused. Behind the crowd, near the outer gates, Adrian stood for only a moment, far enough away not to cause a scene, close enough to see what he lost. He watched Rebecca standing straight in the sunlight, not as his wife, not as his shadow, not the woman he had dismissed, but the one person in the story who turned suffering into structure.
He did not stay long. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he finally understood that the worst punishment wasn't losing the building. It was realizing the woman he tried to humiliate had been the strongest person in it all along. Rebecca continued, This center is dedicated to every mother who has ever been made to feel disposable in the moment she needed care the most, to every family that entered these halls carrying fear, to every nurse, doctor, and staff member who still believes medicine is not about prestige, it's about humanity. Applause rose, real applause, warm and sustained. Tessa cried openly. Owen grinned. Marcus clapped with contained pride. Nolan, as always, looked like a man who had expected the outcome all along. And Rebecca smiled, not the careful social smile she had worn through years of humiliation, but something freer, something earned. When the curtain dropped and Ivy's name gleamed in gold against the stone, Rebecca touched the plaque lightly. Her daughter reached for it too with a tiny, curious hand. And in that moment, Rebecca felt the full shape of what had happened. Adrian had divorced her, thinking he was cutting her out of his world. What he had really done was push her toward a life bigger than anything he would ever deserve to stand inside. So yes, her water broke in the cafeteria. He walked past without stopping. He thought the papers he handed her that morning had ended her story. But men like Adrian only understand power when it looks like dominance. They never see the quieter kind coming, the kind built in silence, in planning, in restraint. In the moment a wounded woman decides she would rather rebuild than beg. Rebecca did not win because she became crueler than him. She won because she became impossible to control. She protected her daughter. She exposed the rot. She reclaimed her dignity, and she turned the place that once witnessed her humiliation into a place of healing for other women. That is not just revenge. That is transformation. And sometimes the most devastating thing a person can do to those who mistreated them is rise so completely that the people who broke them are left staring up from below.